Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Lori, and welcome to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. This podcast fosters curiosity and understanding about neurodiversity while empowering individuals with tools for acceptance and inclusion in classrooms, the workplace, and communities. Featuring shared stories of neurodiverse life experiences, it sheds light on navigating a world not designed for diversity. Universally Unique starts now. Hi, this is Dr. Lori, and this is the second part of my discussion with Robert Marshall. As introduced during our last episode, we are going to talk about an ADHD diagnosis in boys of color. As we consistently do, we'll spend a couple of minutes taking a few breaths before we dive into this conversation. So we'll take 3 box breaths. You're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. I'm just going to count the 3, 2, and the 1. So take your first breath. Second breath. Third breath. Hopefully everyone feels relaxed. As some of you may be aware, the numbers of individuals who are getting diagnosed with ADHD has gone up over the course of the past several years. Currently, at this point, it's about 11.5% of all school-age children actually have this diagnosis. It is primarily a diagnosis that seems to happen more with boys. About 13% of that group are boys, and about 4.2% of that group are females. And that's not necessarily because females don't have ADHD. They tend to have symptomology that is a little less overt, a little less obvious to teachers. Oftentimes, girls have a more inattentive type of ADHD, where teachers and other people around them perceive them to be daydreamers, and that she just gets caught up in social things, and she's so, she's not paying attention. And boys have a tendency to have more outward motor symptomology, which kind of forces people to pay more attention. Robert and I are going to talk primarily about how this plays out in boys of color, because they tend to be a group that is either misdiagnosed or misinterpreted. Not so much that they're not getting the diagnosis, but oftentimes the adults, whether they be teachers or older adults, have a tendency to see Black boys with ADHD as being problematic, because they're a disruption. They're causing a problem in my class. I don't understand why they can't listen. I asked them to stop doing that, and they're still doing it. And unfortunately, if it had been a child who is not a child of color, the teacher may have perceived that somewhat differently. So that is kind of one of the big issues. So Robert, I would like to ask kind of for your input on that, having been somebody who actually was diagnosed later in life and may have been completely overlooked, partially because you weren't a problem in class, but and maybe perhaps because you are a person of color.
Yeah, thank you. I I found it really interesting, especially when we prep to talk about this, is that I think, and first of all, Lord love teachers. I mean, give them all the things. As far as I'm concerned, give them all the things. They should be making the most money out of anyone right now, and I think we realize that most, especially during COVID. Um, but it is, as we say, the challenges with large classrooms, and if there's a spectrum of kids in your classroom and one of them is kind of quiet, maybe you're not going to focus so much on them, right? But if on the other end of the spectrum, there's someone who's just like very busy and interrupts and can't seem to keep still, and is distracting the rest of the class, then they will be, it's like they will be, as you mentioned, problematic. Now, the
Mhm.
challenge I think that teachers, and my assumption is that teachers face, is that there's kind of a model that's already set up in their minds, which is, hey, if this kid who is, can't sit still, bops around, does all of this, interrupts, etc., as a white kid, maybe my thing is, hey, what's going on there? Me,
Mhm.
maybe I've spoken, I've done things, usual things. I've met their parents, I've spoken to them. They're all good. It's a good family. Great. I don't understand it. Why then are they so distracted or annoyed or focused? And there is a challenge where people encounter a black boy and then they feel like they already know what the problem is. It's like, we're following similar patterns, right? You're really loud, you're not listening, you're being disrespectful, you're distracting the class, you're being a class clown. And that was
Mhm.
certainly me. I had no ill intent at all, but I was the class clown. I was high functioning, so I was absorbing what I was being told as I was being told it. I was whizzing through the work I had to do, far, correctly or incorrectly, and then because I couldn't get up and walk around, or because I couldn't leave the room, then I would just sort of turn to the person next to me and start a conversation, or start
Yep.
being jokes and being a joker. And so it really is that I think that is interesting, is to challenge the model that we have as what is a good kid,
Yep.
right? Because are you a good kid with ADHD, or are you a bad kid, right? Oh, and then we find out that you have ADHD.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
think we've got to do a lot more work on that.
yeah. As a former preparer of teachers and administrators, I would say to my graduate students quite often, if you had a kid who academically was doing really, really well, but was your class clown, they're making their own fun because you're not challenging them enough.
Right.
And if it on top of that, you had a kid who had ADHD who wasn't being challenged enough, they have a lot of clever and creative ways to keep themselves amused. Unfortunately, sometimes at the expense of your lesson, which is to me is always is not it's not the child, it's what's going on. One of my mentors always said, somebody's not learning not because they can't learn, but because you haven't found the right way to teach them. So if you don't have the right teaching approach for that child, then they are going to have some issues. And I think if they're doing well academically, we have a tendency to overlook them. Oh,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
fine. There's nothing wrong.
yeah,
And you had mentioned in our previous episode that you had a single mom.
yeah.
So if you had been the kid who was, much more physical and maybe getting yourself into a fight on the playground or whatever, I have a really bad feeling that the first response somebody would have had was, "Oh, he doesn't have a father.
Right.
It must be because it's just his mother and him."
Yeah.
And you know what? No. I mean, and single moms are amazing. So there's or oh, that kid, they don't live in the best part of town. They don't
Right.
have a lot of money. Well, you know what? Money doesn't have anything to do with any of this.
No, I think potential. It's like potential, and that's what I would definitely get on my report cards at the end of the year. It's like the great potential. He's so much potential, such a
Mm.
smart kid, whip smart kid. But we just wish he would focus more in class, and he's a bit of a class clown. And like they all now make sense to me. The challenge is the messaging that goes home, right? Because then the messaging was not how do we help your kid focus? It was your child is a class clown,
Mhm.
right? And then you're saying that to a single mother who's working a job, she had two boys. That was not something that she was going to tolerate. Because even the wording, oh, so he's having fun. That's what he's doing. He's meant to be studying and he's having fun. Like, why is he doing that? I don't want him doing that. And then there's the force and pressure that you get applied at home, which, it takes years to realize that, yes, you can force conformity into a child, but if what they're doing is they're already taking in stride their ADHD to do that, that's a lot of work that you're doing, right? It's not
Yeah.
even the work that you're doing, it's then the additional work to focus, it's then the
Mhm.
additional work to to do what the other folks around you are doing and
Yeah.
saying you've got to do. And it's so hard. And it creates also real tension between the parent and the child, because the
Yeah.
parent, and especially in a single parent environment, uh, it would come with discipline. And so you weren't, again, it was never about teaching me how to focus or teaching me how to take exams or teaching me that I needed a break. It was teaching me that, well, this needs to go back to your mom, and then she needs to deal with you, and then my mom, who would then deal with me, and really then leaves you alone in the
Yeah.
room
Yeah.
dealing it with yourself, which is how we get a lot of grown-ups today that don't have enough emotional regulation and don't know how to deal with big and don't know how to deal with priorities and pressure,
Hmm.
um, because there hasn't been that time of going, hey, do you need help with focus?
Yeah.
Such
Yeah.
a simple question. It's like, can you focus? And if you can't, how
How
can we
can I
help?
help you? Yeah. And I'm sure at some point she felt judged and she felt, maybe a certain sense of guilt or shame. I don't know why he keeps doing that. I don't, that's who he is, but I'll try to get him to stop. Um,
Right.
yeah. And a number of the autistic folks that I've spoken to have said things like, I spent so much energy in those situations masking and trying to pretend to be able to do what it was that everybody else was doing, that I was exhausted. It was so hard to keep that going.
And I wish there was, we've grown up with the idea of Mensa and mental testing and
Mhm.
IQ testing and EQ testing, and I really wish we could come up with some way of like quantifying potential and seeing the gap. It's like this kid has the potential to be an A student, but is a B student or a C student, right? That is a problem to own and solve.
Yep.
They are not a problem kid, and I think that even that adoption of the question from the get go can be about see a great difference in that child and how they grow, right? If I come into the room or you come into the room and you hear your child is having challenges focusing, and that's something that I wish we could help with, it's completely different than, oh, your child's a class clown. As soon as they're done with their work, they start joking and kidding around, right? One of them feels like a disciplinary issue, and the other seems like a conversation about support.
Yeah. And maybe finding ways to channel things.
Yeah.
I don't watch a huge amount of television these days, but there has been a commercial lately where there's a young boy, I think it's British. Um, he's like tapping his pencil and he's constantly making noises, and teachers are trying to get him to stop. And then all of a sudden, this one teacher hands him a set of drumsticks and he finds his place. That's where this this is where I can channel that tapping, the clicking, and all the things that I'm doing. Um, and I love that commercial. I don't know if everybody else is reading into it the way that I do, but I am a special educator, so I saw that in that. But I thought it was quite clever and a nice subtle message.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that that gets the message across without needing to. It's like without being heavy-handed. In classrooms now there are hand crank desks and there are under the seat desks, under seat with pedals,
Yeah.
which to some might sound crazy, but if you have a kid who's sitting there for an hour and is just getting on with work, then it's like, okay, this is working, right? I
Yep.
really hate that idea of like, well, why do we have to make accommodations? And so, well, we make accommodations so that we can get them to their potential. This is
Exactly.
an A potential kid that's doing B or C work. Like, let's help get them there, as opposed to have them be B's and C's and then washed out.
And whatever it is that they're going to be as adults is probably something we really need because, more often than not, those are the folks who they're the entrepreneurs, they're the problem solvers, they're the creatives. And we need that. The other thing that I noticed as I was doing a little bit of research into the background is that sometimes families are concerned about their child getting a diagnosis of ADHD because they already feel, especially a black boy,
Yeah.
already is coming to the table with people with a lot of preconceived, inappropriate, inaccurate judgments. So if I have a child who gets a diagnosis of ADHD, I've given them another label and then they try to avoid that label, which I think is not great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's heartbreaking, having gone through it as the parent and potentially going through it as the child. Um, I mean, there's lots of thinking like, I don't want a handout. Like, why do I need to know I don't want a handout? It's like, okay, well, it's not about handouts. Again, it's about leveling the playing field. And
Exactly.
also, and also it's about you really get like seeing these kids come alive, right? And loving that. We often wait until a kid finds their subject matter, and then that's what we see them come alive that way, right? Or we see them come alive with sports, or we see them come alive with other things, and we're fully invested in that once that
Hmm.
happens. I think there's also a flip side of that where those who aren't interested in school, like maybe there's a reason, and maybe we should be looking into that, and maybe we should have in those conversations. I mean, I almost feel like we should. It's interesting. We should all be tested for ADHD at a certain age, because then we eliminate this idea that like, oh, there's a smaller percent of the population that is this thing or not. It's like, well, to be honest, at this point, I would put my hand up and say we don't know. We have no idea, right?
Yeah.
There are so many. I even went to a great therapist, and they were a great therapist, a person of color, who said, so many kids are diagnosed with ADHD, or we talk about ADHD, but what I need to do is run them. And I'm like, I love that as a tool rather than the whole thing, right? It kind of
Hmm.
scares me because they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to run them and only run them. Well, it's like,
Tire
actually,
them
no,
out. Yeah. No.
yeah, you're going to
But
do
it's
that.
as a potential strategy, like, meditation or a stress ball or, the chair with the pedals and all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, finding a variety of different ways to do that, and you just brought up a good point that you had a therapist of color. Those folks are really hard to find. It's
right.
really hard
Yeah.
to find folks to do the diagnostics on a child of color who is also somebody who understands culturally what the big picture.
Yeah.
And as a clearly obvious white woman, I do my very best in situations, but I don't I don't understand your reality. In a way, you probably don't understand mine, but yours is probably more complicated than mine, especially in the current our current world
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think finding those folks is very difficult to find. And
Yeah.
you're
I
in a
find
more
it.
urban area, so you're lucky, but we get a lot of families that live in more rural areas. Finding a practitioner period
Period. Right.
is tricky. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And especially to try and find one of color. And like there are lots of waiting lists. You can find them, but there are lots of long waiting lists. And I do hope that the spaces go to kids with color. I found myself working with a therapist who also focused on kids with color, and so we had lots of conversations about it and raising kids and all of those things. And yeah, it's so important, I think, to get a basic level of understanding culturally as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
And I think it's interesting, and we can even broaden it to say not just I think Black people or African Americans, but just to think about, I think, the immigrant mentality, right? The immigrant parent mentality, which is, I ran 1,000 miles a day so that you can only have to run 10 miles a day, right?
yeah,
What I want to do as a parent is I want to set you up to run 1,000 miles a day. I want to, if you have to run 1,000 miles a day, you're going to be able to do
yeah,
that. Right. And I think that there is a lot of pushing in that can also come with that ADHD put down, right? It's kind of like, well, no, you don't have ADHD, but you've got lots of potential. So we just need you to work harder. We need you to focus more. We need you to, and it's like, if
yeah,
I knew how to do those things, if I was taught how to do those things, if I was helped to do those things, I'd do them more. But
yeah,
actually, if all you're saying to me is, um, you have to do it, and I am going to discipline you over and over and over again until this becomes a problem. What you do is you take a child who then masks internally all of their own turmoil, right?
yeah,
So it's like, I've gone through the exercise, I've done the exercise, I've finished. But actually, if I make noise in this situation, I'm going to be in a problem. My parents are going to hear it. I'm that problem kid. So then you do something worse with someone with ADHD, which is to say, sit still over and over to yourself in your head, sit still, sit still. and that doesn't help either. It's an extreme
No,
in the
no,
other
it's
direction.
almost impossible. And ADHD it likes to have friends. Like it likes other um types of diagnoses. It's very friendly with anxiety.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you pair a child who has undiagnosed ADHD or diagnosed ADHD that's not being respected and treated appropriately, you raise their anxiety level. And
Yep.
then we have a different problem. And I'm certainly, I'm not a mental health professional. I spend a lot of time with them, but I don't, I'm not. But we keep seeing things like suicide rates going up,
Right.
kids, kids causing self-harm. You know, are these things all kind of coming together because we're not meeting their needs? And if you
I
don't
think
recognize how I'm operating, and I have to keep fighting to make my square self fit in this little round hole, maybe this square self isn't going to be here anymore. Maybe this square self is going to go to wherever it is people go when they're not here anymore, which is
right.
a horrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, we look at the suicide rates among black men are incredibly high as well. And, I think of myself and like being high functioning, which I'm incredibly thankful for, has also meant that I can always see the life that I could be leading and the life I could have led. And I can see if I was here on, always here on time, or if I made this, or if I had the space, if I had all of that. And ultimately, what would happen after a lot of that is anxiety and depression,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it almost becomes like, procrastination moves into anxiety, moves into depression. So it's like, well, I can't do any of those things, so I'm just going to go lie down for a bit and feel better. And when I feel better, I can come and retake the world.
yeah.
But I think there's really some things that we can be helping teach kids at the kid level, and even now at the grown up and adult level.
Oh,
I
yeah,
again,
absolutely.
I found the unshackling of a late stage diagnosis really helped me
Yeah.
look back and go like, okay, I get it, I get it.
Yeah. And it's a vicious circle. If we don't help somebody get off that little treadmill, they're just going to keep running on that treadmill. Like we've got to find a way to put the brakes on, help them step off, help them find the skills and strategies that they need. You were talking about, kids having things in class. One of the students I had at one point, clearly, very clearly, a person with ADHD, sat in a class and went, "This is a noise that makes me want
Right,
to tear my hair out."
right.
So I was like, "I'll be right back." And I walked out of the room. I walked to my office. I picked up a basket of fidget toys. I walked in and I put it down in front of this person. And I said, "Please take whatever it is that you need out of here." Because I had taken all the really noisy things out,
Yeah,
and use it in whatever way you need. And everyone else take whatever it is you need. From that moment on, probably for the next like 7 or 8 years until I stopped teaching at this university, I brought that basket of stuff to class, and students would be like, why did you bring this? And I'm like, because somebody needs it.
yeah, yeah,
And there'd always be someone who needed something that was in there. Some classes more someone's than others. Some classes only a couple people. But And they were like, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to do this in my classroom." And it's like, and they're like, "But what if kids throw stuff?" I'm like, "Okay, here's the rule.
yeah,
If I give you a stress ball, it's to squeeze. If you're going to throw it, then you won't get to use that. And I'll probably have to find something else that you can't throw to help you stay focused." There's this stuff that looks like Velcro that I really like. They're called calming strips.
okay,
And they're so like they feel a little Velcro-y. And you can stick them on stuff. So here, you have this instead, so you can throw that at me or
right,
at your friends or whatever. But, like we have to meet people where they are. And I think one of the things that we're so not doing right now is we're not meeting people where they are. And I
right,
don't think that that's completely because teachers don't want to, but as you had mentioned earlier, classes are getting bigger,
right,
especially now that people don't want to be teachers because they don't feel respected.
right,
It
exactly.
used to be an honorable profession. People would say, "Oh, you're a teacher. Oh, that's so wonderful." And usually when I told them I was a special ed teacher, they'd go, "Oh, you must have so much patience." It's like, no, I don't really have any patience at all. But thank you for thinking that I
Right,
do.
right, yeah,
you know, but we've got to figure out how to regroup and how to give the people who do these jobs the respect that they just, because quite honestly, nobody would be here without a teacher.
Exactly, exactly.
We
And
can't function without them.
I
We
feel
need
like
them.
part of the challenge at the moment, as you mentioned, is almost, the climate of the world right now, and the feeling like, why does it matter? They're not going to get accommodations anyway.
Yeah,
But really, it's kind of, especially growing up as especially as a Black person in America right now, it's kind of like we're asking for more accommodations. Like, I don't think so. I'm not going to, as you mentioned, I'm not going to give someone another label that in fact can go against me rather than helping. So I
yeah.
feel like a rising tide, lifts all boats. And so I think
Hmm.
looking at accommodations for the bulk of kids, finding accommodations that work for each kid would be fantastic.
Well, and more often than not, as an educator, what I found is what I might have done for you is really useful for about 6 or 7 other people in the classroom. And I
Exactly.
would
Yeah.
just offer that to everybody. And if you need it, you take it. If you don't need it, you don't take it. And it's not necessary. Everyone's like, oh, it's so much extra work, but it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. The other thing that is a challenge, and we only have a few minutes left, so I'm probably opening up a dialogue on something that can be really complicated, is medication. And finding the time that when is the right time to say that medication needs to be part of the process. It's like, I think, and for me, you have to eliminate that you've tried a bunch of other things first, because medication, however powerful it is also powerful in a different way. But, helping parents understand that sometimes your kid does need medication. If your kid was diabetic, you would give them insulin.
That's the thing. It's like, why is an invisible diagnosis, right, so hard? It's like, well, because it's invisible.
Yeah.
But I find it really challenging, the idea of medicine, and especially with the fact that it takes a while to get medicine right. So you
Yep.
have to have that patience, and you have to have the wherewithal to say, hey, this isn't going right for my kid. Not stop forever, but we
Yeah.
need to adjust our
Or maybe
meds.
stop that one and try something else. That, I mean,
Exactly.
and I say that to parents all the time, is sometimes the first one that you try isn't going to be the right one for your kid.
Yeah.
Because there's not a measurement. There's not a way to measure it. So,
Listen,
but I'm
the last
anticipating that
thing
we could probably continue this conversation like our first conversation for an extended period of time. And
Yeah.
perhaps we probably should do this at some point in time in the future. But for now, Robert, I'm very grateful for the hour that you've basically spent with me doing these 2 episodes. And I anticipate that we will find some ways to continue to share some information with this community in the future. So thank you, folks, for listening. Thank you, Robert, for coming to hang out with us this afternoon.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Universally Unique, exploring the neurodiverse world of the extraordinary. Join me, Dr. Lori, on Transformation Talk Radio every second and fourth Monday at 11:30 Pacific Time as we continue to explore navigating a world not designed for diversity. For advocacy and support for individuals with disabilities, let's connect. Learn more about consulting and life coaching at notoholisticconsulting.com.